Brad Webb at Brad's Guitar Garage has been having some ongoing videos about electronics books and tube amplifier books from his collection that people who are new to the idea of repairing or maintaining their own equipment might be interested in. So I'll show you some of mine. Mostly old ones here, but I'll mix a few new ones in as I go. Here's one of the books that maybe started it all. It's a Thomas Sams publication, unsurprisingly, since they publish so many schematics, although not a lot of guitar schematics in the Sams collection. And I have many hundreds of them, having thrown out all the color TV and, other junky stuff. But I saved all the PA amp and guitar amp SAM schematics that I've been able to find over the years, purchased from Hamfests and radio and TV shops going out of business and so on and so forth. Anyway, here's the Jack Darr book, Volume 1. Printed in 1965 and 1966. And if you look at the chapters, we have amplifying signal, special signal circuits, power supply, amplifier signal circuits, power supply again. These are service procedures and techniques in the second part. Output transformers and speakers, cables and pickups, various customer complaints that they might ask about or complain about, such as distortion, oscillation, hum, motorboating, noisy controls, microphonics, and so on. And then in the last section, there are schematics for low, medium, and high power amplifiers, which we'll show you a few of. I'll just kind of skim through it. I mean, it shows you a diagram of a phase shift oscillator tremolo circuit and how it functions. Tremolo applied to grids of the output tubes, which is bias tremolo, I think. An LDR system, light dependent resistor, used to couple tremolo to the signal, as Fender does in most of their black-faced amplifiers. There's part of a chapter on echo or reverb, showing a spring reverb circuit. Poke through a little bit here, more about reverb. It goes into the beginnings of transformer-powered circuits, since this is 1966. Replacing electrolytic capacitors, power supply waveform with a rectifier tube, how the phases add together. Complaint troubleshooting, such as low voltages, testing power transformers, and so on. Voltage regulators. We'll go to the back. The whole thing on cables and pickups for guitars, but it's primarily an amplifier book, though it does have information on pickups and on microphones. Okay. Heat-sensitive resistors that, change when they're heated up. Intermittent amplifiers, microphonics. A good starter. This is low power amplifiers, including some AC/DC type amplifiers that don't have a power transformer, which is not something that I recommend anybody work on, spend a lot of money on. If you have one and you want to use it, you need to add an isolation transformer to the power supply. And that's all I'll say about that. There's an early K solid state amp. A Gibsonette, obviously Gibson. Little blurb about some of the Gibson amps that it has schematics for a harmony that's similar to the Valco Supro 51033, which appears to have speaker-driven reverb. So just a basic, decent primer. Some info on Fender AB763, Gibson Harmony 311, input to output, and so on. Now, this is the 4th edition, which unsurprisingly has a lot more solid state amps in it. But chapters are pretty much the same titles, really. Special signal circuits, power supply, amplifying the signal, output stage, power supply, cables, pickups, customer complaints, and then at the end a bunch of schematics for small, medium, and high power amplifiers, which we'll get to. Let's see, we'll go right to the schematics. There's a list, and I put tube or SS depending whether they were solid state or tube type. Sorry, my phone only allows one page here, really, unless I make it tiny. Includes some Supro, Valco, words, airline. Starts with Ampeg, B15N, B22X. Ampeg AC12. And a pretty long schematic collection. A little larger than in the original book, so they're easier to read. And that pretty much, I think, closes out the book. Valco. Oh, and then we get into the really high power stuff, a lot of which is solid state. But including, you know, Este, who bought Magnetone, Fender, Gibson, Gretsch, Harmony, Heil Sound. Okay. A couple of PV, you know, Sears. A useful book. Some of the schematics you can probably find online because they were originally printed in this, even though Sam's really frowns upon, shall we say, reprints from any of their schematics. I don't know if they take legal action, but they claim copyright. A lot of schematics. So those are the Darr amplifiers that I have. There's some in-between editions, but that's the first and the 4th, or possibly last. We'll go to something a little more recent. This is Dave Funk's Tube Amp Workbook. I don't know if this is still available, and I think Dave has probably passed. That's something I taped in there. It wasn't part of the book originally, but a comparison chart for Jensen loudspeakers. This is volume 1, but I don't think he ever put out a second volume. And it says volume 1 Fender, because it includes pretty much all the classic schematics for Fender amplifiers in the back. This is the first edition, 3rd printing in 1996. Okay. And acknowledgments to Ken Fisher and other people, you know, for their help and information. Intro. Okay, here's the table of contents. There's some good stuff in here. You know, the basics of things like how tubes work, bias, power amplifier classes, the preamp, gain and distortion, tone controls, reverb, effects loops and balanced lines, phase inverters, feedback loops, standby switches, ground loops, noise, and safety. That chapter alone should be required reading for everyone. It may save your life and probably save techs a lot of trouble trying to track down noise. Anyway, all right, here's the, for instance, here's the chapter on what is bias. And some various bias circuits being shown. Cathode bias, fixed bias, Class A B amp description, possibilities of fixed bias or battery bias for preamp tubes, contact bias, even AGC bias. Okay, and then here we'll scoot ahead to the ground loops, noise, and safety. This has a very good, simple description of how power distribution works in homes in America anyway, and shows you how to properly wire a replacement cord with a ground line. Okay, notice it shows the old style where oftentimes the switch was on one leg, the fuse was on the other, and when you convert it, you want the green to go directly to ground, and you want the fuse to be the first thing that the hot line sees and the switch after it, and the neutral should go directly to the other leg of the transformer. But there's some information about ground loops, AC power, ground loops, chassis ground, and ground loops, balancing or floating, lifting of filament lines, AC filament lines, and reducing filament hum, various techniques, using ground fault interrupters, and grounding system, star, bus, or plane. Ground planes. AC grounding mod, more on wiring your new power cord. Funny, I don't see anything about removing the death cap. It might be elsewhere in the book, in power supply area or something. But obviously that's something you just do as a matter of course when you convert to a three-wire cord. But overall, a good book. And it has pretty much all the Fender schematics and layout diagrams. You know, beginning with, well, it's got the Bronco, you know, the Champ, sorry. Pro Reverb, the usual stuff that's easily available. I don't think there's anything in here that's particularly rare, but there's quite a few Fender schematics. So a useful book if you happen to find a copy of it. I don't know if it's still in print, but it's pretty good. I've also got Dan Torres Inside Tube Amps. Some people complain about a few mistakes in it, but again, a good starter book. You know, none of the ones I've showed are particularly heavy on math. They are not like the Radiotron manual which will make your head spin, unless you have a degree in calculus or something. But, again, like the Dave Funk book, good basic breakdown of how things work. The bias chapter is quite good, and the rectifier and transformer chapter is also quite good. Let's see. Filter capacitors, solid state rectifiers showing approximate voltage from a given AC input and type of rectifier, voltage doublers, bridges, rectifier circuits. This one I think is still in print, so you should be able to get a copy if you want it. Power transformers. Doesn't really have much in the way of schematics, just some diagrams on a few changes you can do yourself to your Fender amplifiers primarily. Here's something a little different. I think did I lose the cover? Yeah, I don't know where the cover went, but hang on. Is that it? Got stuff tucked in here. Here we go. All right, well, anyway, this is Tube Lore by Ludwell Sibley. This has basically a capsule description of probably about 90% of the tubes ever made, and virtually anything and everything you'll ever see used in any kind of audio or guitar amplifier. Starting from the 1920s on up with early radio tubes, battery-powered radio tubes, a little bit of history on how and when miniature tubes and sub-miniatures came out, octal tubes, and even the new Vista, which is almost transistor-like in its size, but it was a tube, and the Compactron, in 9-pin and 12-pin types, as well as Novar tubes. It's got information on interpreting tube data, such as some date code info and manufacturer code info, who made what tube type, and by omission, who didn't. Let's see. Registration on tubes, European tubes, CRTs, cathode ray tubes, special purpose types. Okay, anyway, it starts in prehistory with the O1A and all the, 1 and 2 digit type tubes that, the 20s and 30s radio collector guys will know. And from there goes on up to the receiving types that you'll see, such as, okay, now we're into the 6s. So, these are all 6-volt tubes with all my notes in there, like a 6CW5, which is basically the same as an EL86, or where is it? 6, should be here. 6BQ5, okay, EL84 basically, except it might not be a true pentode like the EL84. And it goes all the way up into, the 50 and 100 volt tubes that you would see in series string radios and really cheap flea power guitar amps, like your 50L6 and whatnot that have 50 volt heaters. It goes into some of the special purpose tubes, like, the 800 series of primarily transmitting and industrial tubes, which were used for audio sometimes. 807s, for instance. You know, there's a big transmitting tube. It's a very handy book if you come across, you know, a lot of tubes and you don't know what they are. Some of them, they may have unfamiliar numbers and you want to see if they're usable, you know, for audio or guitar purposes. This starts with the 5500 series, so obviously the 5881 of Tweed Bassman fame will be listed in here. Okay, 5703, 5814, which is a 12AU7 industrial. Some of you may know the 5751 as kind of a lower gain version of the 12AX7 with a voltage gain of 70 instead of 100. Often used for phono preamps. 58, here we go. 5881, aka 6L6WGB. Okay, beam power tube, designed by tongue saw with a T11 size glass bulb. There's a button stem, special non-contaminating cathode, carbonized gold-plated grid, zirconium anode coating, and Myconol base. Uprated to 23 watts compared to the original 6L6 tube. And it says it was made by GE, RCA, Sylvania, tongue saw, Westinghouse, beginning in 1950. 7S is the pinout diagram, and that stuff's all in the back. So anyway, just an interesting read and a great way to track down uses for tubes that I sometimes refer to as weeds that nobody these days has really figured out a use for yet. You know, there's a thing on sweep tubes and equipment that uses them. TV sweep tubes for RF and audio use. Just an interesting book that I refer to all the time. There's a supplement that came with it, and now the book is, I think, no longer available in printed form, but it's available as a PDF, which probably would be pretty large. But I think you can buy it as a PDF, which is great if you have an actual screen to work from and not just a smartphone like me. But, yep, replaces all the previous supplements, adds information. You know, includes a little bit like Svetlana, which they're gone now. Understand that the specs and things in these aren't necessarily, and the same for like 1950s and 60s tube manuals, not necessarily translatable to modern Russian-made tubes, which are made with different materials, different standards, maybe not much of an eye towards you know, the same quality that we used to get from American and European makers. Here's some fun, simple little stuff. You could, I suppose, look up, you know, any unfamiliar word or term in electronics online, but there were several books that printed, wrong spot, dictionaries of the various terms. Okay, everything from, you know, phonograph pickups and tube fastener types to microphones, coils, mercury switches, you name it. Okay, the let's see, what's this? This has old-time color codes and information, math symbols, algebra, decimals, dB expressed in watts and volts, commonly used formulas, you know, for reactants and so on and so forth. A lot of this stuff was aimed towards TV and ham radio, I'm sure. Impedance, okay. And when you get up into it a little bit, you know, vacuum tube formulas and symbols, meter formulas, Ohm's law for AC and DC circuits, wire gauges, coil winding data. A lot of this probably assumes you were going to wind your own coils and transformers. Charts for inductance, reactance, and capacitance, resistance, color codes. Here, this might be particularly useful. These are the RMA color codes for transformers from back in the day when manufacturers made some some effort to keep track of such things and adhere to a standard, however loose it might be. Speaker leads and plug connections, although I wouldn't necessarily figure they're always standardized, but RMA color codes again, pilot lamp data, shows various lamps and their size and electrical specifications. Okay, a simple interchangeable tube interchangeability chart. There are others, and some far more complete. Schematic symbols that you'll see used in radio diagrams. Logarithms. We won't go there. Even information on plug-in ballasts, which were filament type or heater type resistors, typically to lower power supply voltages. Okay. I've also got, of all things, a Radio Shack Dictionary of Electronics from the 70s. This is the most comprehensive one I've ever seen, with externally quenched counter tube. Okay. Vectors, harmonics, exciter response. It's pretty detailed. So if you're ever confused about something you read in an old book, this might be the place to look it up, if it's still available. Okay. Anything good in the back? I've also got sorry about that. These were published by Ryder. John Ryder published a lot of radio schematics and compiled booklets of schematics for radio and electronics. So I've got a half a dozen of these about transformers, various types of transformers, special transformers, high frequency transformers, audio transformers. There you go. Okay. Parallel plate feed of transformer coupled amplifiers, high fidelity transformers, impedance ratio with some formulas. I think there's power transformers. Yeah. Add copy in there. This is all power transformers. There's your basic color code. So, kinds of things that if you happen to pick up any of these somewhere or find them, whether it's at a ham radio fest or a flea market or whatever. Here's another Ryder book on rectifiers. Okay, polyphase. Oh, we're getting sophisticated here. Transformerless voltage doubler. Don't do it, please. Not for main power supply anyway. How a full wave bridge rectifier works.